a lot less lucky is over in the East Bay at the Cypress structure that's on the other side of the Bay Bridge. And we're now going to go to Tom DeReese for the latest on that situation. He reports to us from the East Bay Bureau. Tom.
Emerald, the big damage here is the Cypress structure. It's the worst damage I've heard of generally in the Bay Area, but the damage is largely in Oakland and the East Bay confined to that Cypress structure. On the other hand, that's quite bad enough. Oakland officials are confirming 6 bodies, only 6, not the somewhat higher numbers we've heard during the evening. They have taken only 6 bodies out of the Cypress structure. That figure came to me just about 20 minutes ago. There are still people trapped in the Cypress structure. The 2 layers, as you've seen in pictures we took earlier this evening, have pancaked, and there are still cars and they presume still victims trapped between the 2 parts of the freeway, but they don't know whether those people are alive or dead, and they are now mounting a major structure to get the victims out of the freeway. They're using both military and firemen and police officers as well, by the way, from a number of departments where the damage in the East Bay has not been great, have come in here with truckloads of men and buses of firefighters to go help with the rescue efforts on the Cypress structure.
Tom, once again, can you give us the latest on the fatalities at Cypress?
The confirmed fatalities, that is, how many bodies do Oakland officials say they actually have removed from the Cypress structure, which you can see has collapsed, trapping a number of cars, are only 6, as in the last 20 minutes. They do expect to find more victims, but they're still trapped between the layers of concrete, which is almost a half a mile long. So that presumably that death toll will rise, but it is not as high as we originally feared.
That 250 number, apparently we may not get close to. We certainly pray that is true. We should mention that virtually all the bridges in the Bay Area have been inspected. San Mateo Bridge was the last one to reopen, except for the Bay Bridge, of course. It, too, is now open. All the bridges, in fact, are operating in the Bay Area, except the Bay Bridge.
Right, and now we're joined by Linda Yee. She was at Candlestick when the earthquake hit. In fact, your cameras captured some of the earthquake motion.
We captured some of it. Before we get to that tape, though, I have to tell you, we were on the upper level of Candlestick Park. We were with the fans. We were doing our story when suddenly I felt the entire stadium shift. We thought it was just fans at first being very excited, stomping. Then I looked up and saw the actual concrete separating back and forth from the light post. It was the most frightening experience. You'll see the pictures are a little shaky, but this is just this is videotape of the actual earthquake happening. You can probably hear people in the background starting to scream. I wouldn't say it was chaotic at the time. Most people really didn't know what was happening. They were stunned. And then when they actually realized what was happening, that's when the screaming started. A lot of nervous people. Down on the baseball field, you can see that the players were confused about what was going on. And then when we took a look around the stadium, we noticed that there were cracks all around the stadium. In a few seconds, you'll see some pictures of that. In fact, so much debris was falling. I talked to some people who were carrying chunks of concrete out of the stadium.
The staircase at section 53 broke up into pieces like this, and it's really dangerous up there. But the whole thing broke into pieces, so I got my souvenir.
Just missed. Yeah, just missed. It really came down. Yeah, we're on the top deck. It really shook. I've lived here all my life, and it never scared me in an earthquake. That was the first one that scared me.
Despite what was happening, it was really an orderly exit. I mean, some 62,000 people actually calmly walked out of the stadium. There didn't seem to be any panic. We're told that there were 2 injuries. 2 heart attack victims were taken from the Candlestick Park, and a woman who had been hit by falling debris was treated and released at Candlestick Park. As far as the game is concerned, obviously that's not a big priority now, but the baseball commissioners will be meeting tomorrow. They're going to be checking the structural damage of Candlestick Park. They're also going to look at the Coliseum, but it's unlikely that the game is going to continue, the World Series, as far as we know now.
All right, Linda, thanks a lot. And the way the crowd had left that stadium, I think, is one of the salient points of this earthquake tonight. The Bay Area people all over not creating pandemonium and scattering in a panic. Thanks a lot. That video really showed it.
Well, this is NBC News again. We happened to catch KRON in San Francisco just as they were breaking for tape. We have some tape right now. Some highlights of the disaster as it struck today in San Francisco. We're going to show you some of the pictures. Some of these we may not have seen before, some we may. This is the Oakland Bay Bridge, and you can see it right in the center there. Here's a closer shot, how the top level of the bridge collapsed and actually damaged the bottom level, pushed it down. But as we discussed earlier, there are estimates the Army Corps of Engineers will be able to get this back up and running, at least a few lanes of it, in the next few days. This is the fire area where the gas main broke. At least one of the gas mains did. There was a spark that set off a fire, and this is a consequence of an earthquake. Almost always in earthquakes, there are fires that result from them because of the release of gas, and then inevitably there is some spark when the gas reaches a volatile mixture with the air. People here, I don't know if this tape is going to continue to show this, but they were propping up the side of that sagging building to rush in and try to rescue people inside, which is quite heroic. A tragic scene here. Someone pinned in the rubble of the freeway overpass on the Oakland side of the Bay Bridge, where there was quite a large loss of life, apparently, possibly the worst. And these are early night scenes, again, of the fire area. Fortunately, it seems as though the San Francisco Fire Department is going to be able to contain this fire. The department had quite a bit of trouble with water. Water mains also tend to rupture in earthquakes because they run through various types of soil, some of it loose, some of it drilled through rock. And when you get these vibrations and shifts in earth going, the water main can shear as well as the gas main, and then you have this double cascading problem of a fire starting because of gas, igniting the wood frame structures you see. They're tossed about in the loose soil that liquefies when the earthquake shakes it, becomes sort of like jello. Buildings tend to collapse. And then you have difficulty with water. Much of the water you're seeing here was actually pumped out of the bay, was rigged to pump out of the bay. KRON continues its coverage in San Francisco. We're going to check in with them and listen in.
Not having enough water to fight the fires. We have Wilson Van All standing by live. Let's go to him, see how things are going. Wilson?
Well, Suzanne, we told you about the water problems in fighting those fires earlier tonight. What is going on, and it has continued for the past couple of hours, is that the San Francisco fireboat Phoenix has been drafting water out of the bay. It is taking bay water because the water mains that would otherwise feed the firefighting attempt against the fire at the corner of Beach and Divisadero were simply not working. The mains were broken. As that boat drafts water out of the bay, it ships it to the pumper that we see over here, and from there it goes to the fire. We can show you pictures of what that fire was like just about 4:30, 4:45 this afternoon. It was an intense blaze that started in a single apartment building at the corner of Divisadero and Beach, and then it spread to houses both to the north and the west of the original fire. There was simply not enough water to put on those houses to try to save them until, again, the fireboat Phoenix and the pumpers got here and were able to make up for that broken line. As you can see the intensity of this fire now, it started leaping rooftops.
Secure your residence. Shut off the electricity. Shut off the gas.
And it was so dangerous in the area because of some broken gas lines that people were being evacuated for blocks around. They were not able even to stand around and watch their own homes burn. They were being shooed away from that scene for their own future protection. The firefighters kept their efforts on the blaze, but there was not enough water, as we said before, not enough water to keep it from spreading to those homes, both to the north and the west of the building that was originally involved. Ambulances came to the scene because right next to the fire, there was another building at the northeast corner of the intersection of Divisadero and Beach, another building that had collapsed, a 3-story apartment building that they kept bringing people out of. And yet we go back to scenes of this fire and see the intensity of that. They had rescues from that other building. Let's see if we can see the one that was indeed collapsed. No, these are the fires, the flames leaping the roofs and involving those houses to the north and so forth. Our understanding, and this is again an unconfirmed report, is that there were people who did not make it out of that burning building. Our understanding is that there were people who perished in that fire, but before we get any real confirmation of that, it will take the arson investigators, the fire department investigators going in there and finding out what exactly is in there when daylight comes. Suzanne, we'll go back to you.
Wilson, I know this is difficult to estimate with what's going on down there, but a rough estimate of how many separate buildings were involved down in the Marina District?
The best we can tell in terms of the fire was that there was one building where it started on that corner of Beach and Divisadero, and we think 2 houses to the north of that and also 2 houses to the west of the original building were involved in the flames and destroyed. There would be water damage and perhaps smoke damage to other buildings, and there are still some other buildings where there were collapses. The one across the street that we talked to you about, and another building, we believe, on Cervantes Street that also collapsed. Our understanding is that there were not people inside that second building. However, there were people pulled out, fortunately alive, from the one that collapsed across the street from the fire. That's our best news tonight. And again, the bad news is that apparently there were fatalities in the fire itself.
We have heard word that there were 8 fatalities, and that is a confirmed word that we have from the Beach and Divisadero fires, so I'm assuming they mean all of them. When you talk of structures collapsing, Wilson, I'm curious as to whether they collapsed because of the earthquake or because of a gas explosion within the homes. Is any way we can know that at this time?
Our understanding is that it was entirely the earthquake. There seemed to be no fire involvement in the buildings that collapsed. And one of those, a big 3-story apartment building that after the collapse had come down to less than 1 story in all. There were some explosions associated with gas leaks, but those appeared to be from the scene of the fire itself. We were here very shortly after the fire broke out, and we saw no evidence of any kind of gas explosions anywhere else, although a lot of this could change. Obviously, people will be going inside those buildings after daybreak and trying to get the best information they can. But it appears that the buildings that went down, that collapsed in rubble, did so because of the intensity of this earthquake.
With us tonight is Claudia Gomez. She is a desk assistant here at Channel 4 that found herself in a very unlikely situation today. Where was it?
On the Bay Bridge, probably about a half-mile past Treasure Island toward the East Bay.
Were you heading for the city or leaving?
I was leaving the city, heading toward Oakland.
What'd you see? What'd you feel?
The bus started shaking really violently, back and forth, side to side, and we picked up movement right after that. I think everybody thought everything was fine, and then all of a sudden we saw a great deal of people running toward us away from where the bridge collapsed, screaming, "The bridge is collapsing," and I think we all thought that it was going to be sort of a domino effect, that one section would fall and then another and then another.
Earlier you had said that the bus stopped and then you felt the movement. Did you feel any movement at all as the bus was rolling down the bridge?
You know, I sensed that the bus driver...
There is a bus there, I should say, Claudia. That was not your bus. You were not that close to it.
No.
All right.
I was probably about, I would guess, about a quarter of a mile toward the San Francisco
But again, you were on the lower deck,
on the lower
going
deck.
toward the East Bay.
Right.
What'd you do then?
I think everybody thought that it was fine, and they started rolling again until all the wave of people from that section that collapsed started running back toward our bus and screaming, "The bridge is collapsing." There was real panic.
How did people behave, though? I mean, did they leave their cars? Did they stay in their cars? Did they attempt to turn around?
No, absolutely. They just left their cars, keys in the cars, doors wide open. They were thoroughly panicked, running back. I think they had the same idea that I did, get to land. So people abandoned their cars.
How long did it take you before your bus started moving again and managed to turn around back to the city?
I didn't wait around that long. I ran back to Treasure Island. I ran probably about a half mile back to Treasure Island. And probably a half hour after that, they started turning the vehicles that were actually on the Treasure Island part of the span. They started turning them around and heading them back to San Francisco.
All right. We heard an earlier report, and we don't know if this is confirmed, but it was, again, a report that a woman on the upper deck of the Bay Bridge, in other words, a woman going from Oakland to San Francisco, saw the bridge go down right in front of her, and she, for some reason, decided that she would speed up and try to make the jump. Well, she didn't make the jump, and her car was the one that ended up falling into the bay. So we do have, we had earlier reports of the Coast Guard search and rescue. We understand that there was one fatality there, the woman going overboard. So that is something that presumably will come up again as soon as we get a little bit more clarification on that story, but it is one that is circulating tonight. Bob?
Don Sharp is our head engineer here at Channel 4. He's also a part of this historic day as well. Don, where were you?
I was going to check for parade coverage for the A's over to Oakland, so I was actually on the bridge. And I was in a four-wheel drive Bronco, which is a very heavy automobile. And my first experience was being tossed up in the air, and I said, Jesus Christ, I've blown 4 tires simultaneously. But then when the car came back down and shifted over 2 lanes and kept going for 45 seconds, wait a minute, this is not me.
You know, one of the interesting situations is that we know how volatile the bridge could be, and yet nobody really knows the proper procedure or has been told the proper procedure of what to do in the event that this happened. What were your instincts?
My instinct was to correct for what I just felt, and when it happened again, moving over 2 lanes, I realized that it wasn't me, and the sound sounded like a freight train was continually hitting the bridge. And when I saw other cars beginning hitting the side of the bridge, I realized that, hey, something is going on here. Then all of a sudden, there was a cave-in the bridgeway, actually by 6 to to 12 inches. And I was in a four-wheel drive, and it was like driving in the mountains. Finally got off of the Bay Bridge and kind of sat on the side, called the assignment desk, and at that point, it dawned on me that it was just 6 to 12 inches of just the pavement had just sunk into the ground, and there was water gushing out from the aftermath of that.
This appears to be about a 25, 30-foot span of the upper deck which collapsed, and
Yes.
we have varying reports on whether the bridge is structurally sound at this point, whether the pavement can be repaired. And the latest word we have is that Caltrans is going to have to look at it very, very carefully tomorrow, but all day tomorrow it'll definitely be shut down. There's nowhere to do an easy repair on this kind of damage.
Well, we're already getting some conflicting reports as to when this bridge is going to get back to normal. From the looks of it, of course, I'm no expert on the bridge, but you can see that the bottom pavement has been removed. And it would seem that the option at this point would be for engineers to remove this piece of debris and probably move cars back and forth in both directions on the lower span. We'll see if that happens.
I don't know if we have said this, but the two cars there were the only ones involved directly in that collapse of the upper deck. And as we understand it, there were no fatalities in those two cars. The men and women in them survived. In fact, they walked out of the cars. So as amazing as that seems, it may just be the one fatality from the bridge collapse, and that would be the woman who stepped on the gas and decided to go 50, 60 miles an hour and try to jump the span, which did not work, and she landed in the water.
We're going to Anthony Moore right now. He has been covering the calamity at the Cypress collapse. Anthony?
Well, Bob and Suzanne, the chaos of the initial moments after the earthquake has turned into some more organized chaos here. We're at the command center that Oakland police have set up for the Cypress section of the freeway disaster. Behind me, you can see the freeway. This section did not actually pancake, but the far side of the freeway, clearly the pylons on the upper tier have broken free, and it is now perched precariously over. Said some rescuers, it's simply the rebar on this side which is holding this section of the upper part of the freeway from actually collapsing again. And they're worried about those aftershocks, but they're also worried about all the people who were on that freeway at the time of the earthquake. Now, most of the initial victims, the people who were on this section at least, were able to get out. On the other sections that we were at earlier, we have some tape of that. Most of those cars were so badly crushed that most of the people were not saved. But what you're looking at now is a rescuer about to take down one victim who survived with minor injuries, a young man. There you can see his still booted feet coming down on a forklift. It was a combination of rescuers from the fire department and individual citizens. In fact, the man you're looking at standing or kneeling over the victim stayed with the victim while he was trapped in his car. He said for 2 hours. The man was moaning, screaming, trying to have somebody free him. And it took the jaws of life, those hydraulic jaws, to open up the car, which was crushed almost like a sardine can, and get him out. Fortunately, in that section, there weren't that many other cars. I'm told that there were some cars in the area which were so totally obliterated that there couldn't be anybody alive, but it was not bumper-to-bumper traffic at this time. What you're looking at now is raw video which we shot just moments after the rescuers were able to bring this victim down. This is now must have been about 9 or 9:30. You lose track of time at this time. That's a close-up shot of the rescuers attending to the victim. A young man, I am told. Rescuers did know who he was. We only know that his name, I believe, was Tim. They did not want to release his full name until his family had been notified. But he apparently was suffering only from a loss of blood, from shock, of course, and some leg injuries. And he was one of the only people that we have heard of actually being brought out. That does not mean that rescuers are not trying, however, to look for more victims. They have apparently brought in a number of dogs, and they just held a conference here, we understand, to determine what they're going to do next. With these dogs, we are told they're planning on going in the areas that people are not able to get into, where the top section has crushed down We're live on the air right now.
I do not care, sir.
I guess we're being pulled off.
You are?
Can you tell me why?
No, you know there's a disaster.
I guess we're being pulled off the air right now. We're going to have to throw it back to you, Bob and Suzanne.
Okay, Anthony, it's part of the liability to be in a dangerous area like that. But, of course, Anthony's trying to get as much information as he can, and we'll be checking back with him momentarily.
Well, and it could be that they need to get more PG&E special light trucks in there so that they can see what they're doing. In that case, of course, we understand why that has to happen.
And the worst of the damage, as far as we've been able to ascertain, has been on the Oakland side of the Bay Bridge, the San Francisco Bay Bridge there, the Oakland Bay Bridge, where a huge piece of roadway, perhaps 1.5 miles long, in an elevated roadway, collapsed and fell down on top of the lower roadway, and people down below, this is the bridge here, and you can see a portion of the bridge itself that collapsed, which you've probably seen if you've been with us earlier from time to time, and there were a couple of casualties on the bridge itself and considerable damage in that area alone to the Oakland Bay Bridge. But on the eastern approach to the bridge, Interstate 880, there was a major collapse, and perhaps we'll see that in just a second if you haven't seen it before, where the concrete pillars simply splayed out like somebody doing the splits. And the top part of the roadway fell down on the bottom part of the highlighted area there, crushing everybody underneath at the worst possible time during the rush hour at shortly after 5 o'clock local time when there was plenty of traffic. One other tidbit which shows you exactly how far-reaching something like this can be, a disaster of this magnitude that struck California, that there is some question now about the launch of the space shuttle Atlantis, because apparently there is a lab in California, an Air Force Control Center in Sunnyvale, California, that is going to be controlling the Galileo deep space probe, controlling the rocket engine that sends that controversial probe that's going to be launched by Atlantis into space. And that lab may have sustained some damage in California, so because of that, there may be a delay in the Atlantis launch. And we'll get more information for you on that a bit later. A lot of the other structures in town, the older structures, particularly unreinforced masonry. That's the key. Those buildings, the older buildings, do tend to collapse because they're designed to withstand the force of gravity, which is strictly vertical. And they're perfectly fine at doing that. Like a lot of the buildings in Mexico City during the quake there in 1985 that were built with either unreinforced masonry or built with the more modern slab and column technique. You've probably seen these buildings going up where they'll pour a slab of concrete and then put a bunch of columns up and pour another slab of concrete, more columns. They're built perfectly well to withstand the force of gravity, vertical. But if you get any kind of a swaying motion going, suddenly these buildings can come down like a stack of cards, which is somewhat the nature of what happened to the Bay Bridge area, the approach to the Bay Bridge on Route 880 on the Oakland side of the Bay Bridge in San Francisco. It had good vertical support, but apparently that support finally swayed enough so that those vertical columns snapped and it came down and created quite a calamity there with a great deal of loss of life. Now, we have some videotape pictures that we're going to show you once again in case you're joining us now and of the situation in San Francisco. This, fortunately, was the only serious fire in the city of San Francisco, and this was in the northern part of town. It, as you can see, took a number of buildings there, and it took quite a while to get that fire kind of contained. There was some question about whether or not it would just keep spreading and become sort of a firestorm, consuming building after building. The buildings there are wood frame and normally would have withstood the shaking fairly well of a quake, except they're built on fill land, which tends to liquefy, amplify the vibrations of a quake, and then even wood structure buildings can let go. They'll flex enough that they finally, the supports will release and they'll let go. The water was a problem there, as we've told you earlier. They had water lines that went, gas lines were fueling this fire. And gas, in fact, continues to be a problem throughout the San Francisco area where there are breaks and leaks in gas lines. That's a serious danger of other fires erupting. But they had to pump water out of San Francisco Bay and had to rig a whole series of pumpers and lines to get water onto this fire to try to put that out. And apparently it is contained and under control at this time. This was videotape taken earlier, and quite a conflagration. There was a fire that hit Boston about 18 years ago. It started in one house in one neighborhood in an area north of Boston, Chelsea, and did get out of control. It became a firestorm where it was feeding on itself, and embers were setting more buildings on fire, and the fire department was helpless to contain it. It wiped out 18 blocks of Boston. It was quite a disaster in the Chelsea area of Boston. This one looked like it was brought under control. In fact, in San Francisco, a city that has braced itself for years and years against earthquakes and has tried to make all of its new structures, anyway, at least earthquake-proof, they responded very quickly and very well. Their emergency services managed to stay together. They had communication. They had the police operating and functioning. The mayor was rather upbeat initially in the quake. He said the police department is solid. The communications are up. The fire department was getting volunteers in and extra firemen coming in automatically. And they were able to contain that fire fairly well.
Before I get to a South Bay report, quickly, I want to let you know that we have an emergency medical report from the Alameda County Coroner's Office. Now, of course, the Alameda County Coroner's Office is the one handling the large number of people who have died in that 880 freeway collapse, the Cypress structure that collapsed south of the Bay Bridge toll plaza. And we have heard different figures about the fatalities. We assume from the Office of Emergency Services their latest figure is around 100. Earlier they had said it might go as high as 250. So at any rate, a large number of fatalities. And the Alameda County Coroner's Office at this time is asking for refrigeration companies to please contact them as soon as possible. The Coroner's Office has run out of space. So if you run a refrigeration company, if you know somebody who does and perhaps is not hearing this report, the Alameda County Coroner's Office would like to hear from you. Secondly, 2 children were rescued 40 minutes ago from the Cypress collapse, and they were rushed to Alta Bates Hospital. Now, we've been telling you about and showing you some of the rescue operations going on in that 880 overpass, the double deck there. And 2 children, fortunately, rescued 40 minutes ago. That's some of the good news that's coming out of it, because we haven't heard a rescue in the past hour or so. Their parents, unfortunately, I just read now, died in that collapse. The children are on their way to the hospital.
We will recap once again and show you the pictures that are making history here in the Bay Area. And we'll begin with this famous structure. The other bridge, we have kiddingly called it. It is the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge, and this is the cantilever section, the part leaving Oakland and heading toward San Francisco. About a 50-foot stretch of this bridge, as you can see, collapsed, falling on the lower deck, trapping 2 cars. This was the nightmare. This was the nightmare. It's called the Cypress collapse. We are calling it the Cypress collapse. It is a section of 880 that leads out of the city toward the east, toward Alameda. And as you can see there, the force of a 7.0 earthquake literally took this overpass and turned it into a toy. The Marina fire, 3 confirmed dead here. This is a troublesome fire that firefighters here in the city had a lot of trouble fighting because of lack of water, and for some time they had to siphon water out of the bay to fight it because all the pipes carrying water in this area were damaged or destroyed. There was a large wall that collapsed at 6th and Brannan. We were saying Townsend earlier, but at 6th and Brannan we have 5 confirmed dead. We're still checking on the whereabouts of 3 people who were missing. Down in Santa Cruz, of course, a lot of buildings and road damage. It's the story that we are seeing all through the Bay Area tonight. Virtually every county was affected by this 7.0 earthquake, an earthquake that was felt virtually the extent of the state of California, as far north as Eureka, as far south as Los Angeles, and people in Reno were rocking tonight from this one.